Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is Session 5. Actually, we'll do 5 and 6 together here. We left off last time, just before we ended, I was talking to you about the things that we can't leave behind, but we've got to keep working on. And one of those things, by the way, that PowerPoint trend is Numbers 5 and 6. So one of the things that I mentioned to you was the fact that every assembly has to begin functioning as a body, and that's something we can't leave behind. We have to continue to work on that. And there's really a lot in your notes that I would like for you. Oh, you know what? I meant to say a couple of things there. Okay, sorry. Just thinking about stuff I meant to say and didn't say it. It takes real time and effort, honestly looking at the things that we're being introduced to in order to get them understood and to get them implemented into our conduct and behavior. But let me just give you another example to take up with where we left off the last time. And I know we did a brief intermission between Part 6 and Part 7 on Sonship prayer. And last week after the study, Rick came up and he sat down up here with me and he told me this. It's not a story, but he told me this. And like so many things that people say to me, I hear it, but only later does the light come on for me. And so I don't know, Rick, if I was looking at you like I didn't know you were speaking English. I'm not sure what was happening to me after the study. But he was saying this. I know this is why he was saying it to me. But then later, I thought of that. And you know how, okay, look, I've had this happen where I've said something to somebody over and over. Like I might say, we're not appointed unto wrath. We're going to be raptured out. We're not going through the tribulation. The dispensation of grace has to end before the resumption of Israel's program can take place. And then you've said that a dozen different ways, and then someone comes up to you about a month later and goes, you know what I discovered? That the Israel program can't start again till the dispensation of grace is over. And then you know what you feel like? Really? Good. I'm having that moment now. Because now I'm going to use it in the framework of what I put in your notes. This issue of prayer, I know, is still not familiar to everybody yet. You're still used to the old way of doing that. But here's what I learned. You know what muscle memory is, right? It's when you do something enough times that you can do it automatically without really thinking about it. And I've told you the story before about when my dad and I would go fishing out on those country roads at Cross Lake over in Louisiana. And it was on those gravel roads that I learned to drive a Standard. Or, if you were my dad, learned to ride a Jackrabbit, because that car was just leaping every time I'd try to get that gear going. And my dad said to me, one day you'll get in and you won't even think about it. You'll hit that clutch, you'll crank the car, you'll throw it in gear, and you'll be talking, and you'll drive out of the driveway and you'll shift the gears, you'll come to a stop, and you won't give that any conscious thought. And at that point, I thought that will never happen for me, because this is a lot of information about how much gas do I give, how fast do I let off the clutch, all of that business. It was, when it's new, that's the way it is. And then one day we're going somewhere, and I'm in my dad's old Ford Fairlane 500, and I'm downshifting and coming up to a light and pushing on the clutch, and he looked over and he goes, you don't even think about it anymore, do you? And then I remembered what he said to me out there on those old gravel roads, and I thought, wow, that really did happen. If you know how to drive a Standard, you know what I'm talking about. You have developed muscle memory. You just know that's how that works. Well, here's what Rick told me, and this is incredible. In order to develop that kind of muscle memory, you have to be able to repeatedly perform that act a minimum of 500 times. But that's not the point I'm after. The point is, if you now have to learn if you've learned how to do something so that you don't have to think about it anymore, and you have to learn it a whole new way, then it moves from a minimum of 500 times to a minimum of 3,000 times. And do you know why? Because you're having to unlearn the old, because that's what wants to take over. That's the automatic response. And to override that, you have to do it 6 times as many times as you did it to just get it in the first place. Well, we spent our whole lives praying the old way, and we got comfortable with it, and it was natural to us. And we prayed about any and every little thing any way we wanted to. It didn't matter if it was in accordance with what our Father was doing or not. If we thought of it, it just came out of our mouth. And now you learn to pray intelligently. You were told you don't know what to ask for as you ought. And now you're trying to learn that. And so you find yourself doing this. You start this process out, you find yourself praying and catching yourself and saying, oh, wait a minute, Lord, that's not right. You ever done that? Oh, yeah, I should. That's not what I was. Yeah, okay, that's not right. And so now, then you want to get discouraged with it and go, I just don't know what to say. Brother Mike won't let me say anything. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, it's my fault. Yeah. So I know that's where we all go through this. But here's the thing I want you to understand. If you've already learned how to do it one way and now you're being taught to do it another way, there's only one way for you to get comfortable praying like Paul prayed. And what is that? To keep doing it until finally doing it right becomes more natural and more comfortable than doing it wrong. That's the only way. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much encouragement, but it is. Because now you understand that the redoing of a process involves more than getting it in the first place. And if you're like me, how many years did you do it wrong? Don't. Okay. But I mean, you know, and we did. We got in a groove with that. And so now, as slow and methodical as it may be, may I say to you that one day you're going to start talking to your Father and it's going to sound just like something the Apostle Paul would say, and you're not going to have to stop and try to figure out if these are the words you're supposed to use. Or understand, is this really what my Father is doing in this dispensation of grace? One day, you're going to push on prayer's clutch and drop it down into first and let off and give it a little gas, and your prayers are going to take off and it's going to be seamless. But in order to get there, you've got to do that work. But it can be done. Don't give up on that. But what else am I saying besides that about prayer? This is another thing. We talked about this group functioning as a body. How about now this issue of prayer? Can we really look at any of those things that were in the past and say, oh yeah, I got all that I got all that down pat, no problem. We have plenty of things to be working on here. And so now we're about to get another one. That's the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about. So this new area of doctrine that we're moving into. And by the way, this new area of doctrine is going to require some prayer time too. Quite a bit, I might add. And so these operations, these various operations that we're supposed to be engaging in with our Father are going to be very important to us because and I should have done that. I may publish a list and just give them to you, but I should have started at Romans 12, and I should have given you from verses 1 and 2, and then verses 3 to 8, then verses 9 to 16, then verses 17 to 21, and then chapter 13, verses 1 through 7, and then verses 8 through 10, and here 11 through. I should have given you the operation for every one of those. Because actually, we're laboring with our Father. There's the godly living, which is how it changes our conduct and behavior in our everyday life. But there's a particular operation that we're engaging in with our Father, and we really didn't spend the time talking about that. And I should have done that. So I may print those up and actually hand them out to you at some point. So that we understand that. Okay, now Trent, I need you to take me in this lesson to where you see Romans chapter 13 and verse 12, because that's where I want to take this up. Romans chapter 13 and verse 12, and I know that we're going to be skipping some things in order to get there, but those are all in your notes, and I want you to see those, but the thing I need to talk to you about in the time that we have, it's actually going to be, part 6. Keep going until we get to verse 12. I'm sorry, I should have given you a heads up on that, because that's where I want to go. Yeah, it's in that one, so just go forward until you see it. I know verse 11 is the first one, but I think everybody understands what we're talking about in verse 11, right? Okay, now verse 12. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. But put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to break this down for you into the 3 components of godly edifying. So the first thing we have is the godly thinking, and I'm not just saying it that way because this sounds really godly. In other words, I'm reminding you that this is an aspect, this is the first aspect of godliness. In other words, thinking about this the way our Father does, thinking like God, godlikeness, see, that kind of thing. So chapter 13, verse 12, that first phrase, and look, if we had time, I would let you break this down, that this verse right here is one sentence long. The sentence is completely in verse 12, and the sentence is broken into 2 parts by a colon. Does everybody see that? So I'm just reminding you of the kind of the process that we go through. Well, in verse 12a, which is going to be the first phrase that we encounter, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, that is the godly thinking that is going to be, you have to come... That in and of itself isn't saying, do you think this way? The fact that he says that statement means that ought to bring you to a certain realization. When you realize that what is meant by the night is far spent, the day is at hand, that in turn produces the godly living. And that is in the second part of verse 12, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Now let me show you how this works. When you really understand what Paul is saying when he says the night is far spent, the day is at hand. When you understand what he's talking about there, that brings you to realize something specific. It is that realization that now causes you to cast off those works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Now, just to finish it out, go ahead and, is the third one up there, part 3? No, all right, you can leave it right there, And the godly labor, that is going to be that operation that your Father once performed in this dispensation of grace, that godly labor is contained in verses 13 and 14. And that's why I highlighted verse 13. When you understand, when you realize what it means, when you hear, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. And that in turn motivates you to cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. And once those two are working in you, you are now able to participate in an operation that up to this time you couldn't. And that godly labor is, first of all, it has a couple of parts to it here. Let us walk honestly as in the day. That's the first part of the godly labor. I know that doesn't mean much yet. The other part is down in verse 13. And put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I got to tell you, as I was looking at these verses, and by the way, this second part is the next step in the process of being conformed to the image of God's Son. Putting on the Lord Jesus Christ is the next step in your being conformed to His image, or having His character built into you. Now, when I looked at this thing, I have to tell you, this threw me for a loop. Look with me in verse 13. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. And I looked at that list, and it gave me a bit of a problem, because I thought, wait a minute, shouldn't we already know better than that by now? Are you telling me that a son that's in the second component of godly judgment now has to be told rioting and drunkenness are not things a son ought to be engaged in? Shouldn't we have known about that back in Romans 6? The difference between walking after the Spirit and walking after the flesh? We should have, shouldn't we? And I was perplexed about that. And I thought, why is it? Because look, if I'm right, and this is a whole new level to your education, how come we're rehashing something we learned back in our sanctification? But that's not what this is. That's not what this is. I only was wondering about that because of what I didn't know when I was first looking at it. Yes, it does talk about, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. That phrase is in there. But if you think the only thing this is talking about is not following fleshly lust, you miss the point of what's going on here. This is way beyond that. So, as I'm just kind of giving you a general overview about what's happening in these verses, we're going to come back and we're going to look at every part of this and get the details of it. So, let's go back to verse 12 in this next one. And, no, give me the next one. Give me that next slide, because it should be, oh, that's it? That's all I had on the PowerPoint? Well, you've already read it now, so I might as well read it to you, and then we'll talk about it. The new aspect of our Father's business that we're now being instructed in is the issue of our Father's operations against the adversary and his policy of evil as it is at work in this world. That is the new operation. And that's something that up to this time we haven't had the capacity to do anything with. But now that you've reached this point in the education, it is now time for you to learn the doctrine that is actually going to allow us, I guess we could have a little fun with this. I forgot to turn on my timer. Okay, all right. We're now going to have the capacity to impact Satan's policy of evil as it is at work in this world. And when Satan, now, you know, we talked about when you put on the armor of light, this is the place where Satan gets the green light and all that kind of business. But look, it goes way beyond that. The reason that you're going to suffer a direct and personal attack from the adversary is because you are going to engage in a godly labor that impacts his policy of evil as it is at work in this world. And what you're going to receive is the retaliation for what you have done. Now, let me set your mind at ease. In the beginning, the response to us is going to be very mild, comparatively speaking. And what you're going to do to impact his policy of evil is really against a very broad and general aspect of his policy of evil. But it has to be that way. You have to start somewhere, so you start at the beginning. And as we begin to learn this doctrine and understand, look, we're going to have to go back and learn the things that would make us understand the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Because right now, the only thing that would bring up into your mind is, oh, okay, so the night is almost over and now the day is almost here, or something like that. But there's something very specific about this phrase. To begin to think, that phrase is supposed to generate a certain kind of thinking in you, because you understand what that phrase is talking about. And just to set the stage for it, let me tell you that that phrase is not talking about the dispensation of grace itself. If we were to go back to this timeline, and let's put the cross here, and here's that extension of mercy, and here's the dispensation of grace, and then, after that, you've got, the Lord's day of wrath, that tribulation, and then on out here, you've got the kingdom as it's set up on this earth. When he talks about now, is he talking to people in the dispensation of grace? Yes. And so he certainly has us in mind. But what he's saying is, now that you've gotten to the place in your education that you've gotten to, I need you to realize that something, and when Paul says the night is far spent, the day is at hand, that is not describing the dispensation of grace. That is describing the timing of when God brought this dispensation of grace in. Now, I know I'm not proving it to you right now. All I'm doing right now is talking to you about this passage. Because when God brought this dispensation of grace in, it was at a very particular time that he interrupted Israel's program. A very particular time. Because when you think about it, you might ask yourself the question, let's go all the way back. Let's go all the way back to the time of David. Why didn't God, just before David, why didn't he interrupt Israel's program then and bring in the dispensation of grace, rapture them out, and then resume his program with Israel? Okay, well, the cross hasn't happened. What about at any time, we do know that he had that 1 year extension of mercy after the cross. Why not do it before the 1 year extension of mercy? Or why not do it in the middle of the tribulation? Or why not? He is God, he could do whatever. But there was specificness to the timing of when he brought this in. Now, I'm kind of infringing a little bit on what's ahead, but look, remember what I told you earlier? And we're going to look at the verses, not tonight, but we're all going to look at these because I need you to get this down in your mind to understand that phrase, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, and what's being talked about by these works of darkness. And by the way, those things are more than you think. In fact, let me just show this to you, and we'll do the details of this the next time, but let me just kind of preview this. Turn to Ephesians chapter 6. I'm going to turn you to a very familiar verse, but I want you to see something here that we don't normally think about. When we talk about, we're going to go back and we're going to look at, when he says casting off the works of darkness, he's talking about something that the policy of evil is producing in this world. And there are the powers of darkness. Jesus talked about the powers of darkness. Now, when we talk about Satan opposing us, the way we normally think about it is, Satan doesn't like what we're doing, and so Satan opposes us. But I'm going to tell it to you this way. Out of all the angels that rebelled with Lucifer, those angels, took over positions in the heavenly places. There is a group of those angels, and it's, let's just read it in Ephesians 6, instead of me writing the whole thing up. Ephesians 6, verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, and you know what those are? Those are the heads of each of those divisions of the heavenly places. Against powers, that's the number 2 position in each of those. Against, and here's the one I'm after for the sake of our discussion tonight, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. There are rulers of the darkness of this world, And these angels are responsible for orchestrating and promoting the darkness that Satan's course of this world wants the whole earth to be engulfed under. Darkness of this world. And when we impact Satan's policy of evil, it is these angels right here that are going to do the retaliating against us. You need to understand that there is a particular group of angels who have been assigned to keep pushing Satan's policy of evil and its producing of darkness. He is bringing the world to a certain pinnacle. And when we impact its ability to do that, it's their job to respond to us. And by putting on that armor of light, their goal is to extinguish that light. And failing that, to at least dim that light down. And I'm just talking in that way because of the words that the Bible uses, but what it's really talking about is to get you to quit impacting the policy of evil, to stop your sonship life right there and don't go any further, and to be like the Corinthians who were terrified of the things that were going to happen to them, and they just walked away from sonship. And even if you don't want to walk away totally from sonship, if you'll just stop at the second component of judgment, if you'll stop there and you'll stop impacting Satan's policy of evil in the world, oh, maybe that light's not completely extinguished, or maybe it's just dimmed down a little, but you know what? You're not really casting off the works of darkness anymore. And that's what your Father is training you to do. Those works of darkness are promoted by the rulers of the darkness of this world. And really, I'm not going to do a systematic study of the darkness, but as we go through Paul's epistles, you're going to find out that this issue of darkness is way bigger than you might have imagined. So when he comes along and says, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, there's something we're supposed to realize, that by the time we get to that place, Romans 13:12, that statement has meaning. If someone says, it's the bottom of the ninth with 2 out. What does that statement mean? Okay, so only 3 of you know baseball. Okay, but if you're playing the Rangers, okay. What does that mean? It's the bottom of the ninth with 2 out. That's right. You know what? There's meaning behind that, isn't it? And all they got to do is say that statement, and you understand a world of things automatically. You understand where you are in the game. You understand that 1 more out and we're finished. You understand a lot. Paul is making a statement like that. The night is far spent. The day is at hand. That's the kind of statement that is supposed to make you realize something. And once you realize it, your natural response as a son is going to be to cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Now that makes you a potential threat to the adversary. But as soon as you move from the godly thinking and godly living to the labor of now let us walk honestly as in the day and put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, that is your direct opposition to Satan's policy of evil in this world, and you are limiting its ability to produce the darkness that he wants produced in this world. In essence, what I'm saying to you is, you're taking the first swing. This is not about us sitting around waiting to see what the adversary is going to do, because if that's all we're doing, he's never going to do anything. But when you take the first swing, he's saying, I can't let that go. I'm going to swing back. Now, yes, it all starts off pretty mild. And aren't you glad? Because really, this ought to do 2 things. It ought to, for some folks, you're saying, I've been waiting to get to this place where I could finally make an impact on the devil. But at the same time, the seriousness of our opponent and the weapons at his disposal should make us think soberly about this conflict. There's a lot of human bravado. Well, yeah, I'll just tell the devil, bring it on. Well, okay, you won't be singing that tune very far into the education. That sounds good. But I got to tell you that just trumped up bravado will not be enough to handle the attack from the adversary. Because now we're not talking about a general policy of evil as it's at work everywhere in the world. Now we're talking about a custom-made, individualized attack for you personally and directly. And that ought to sober us up. You understand what I'm saying? That ought to make us think about this carefully. Now, don't let this scare you. Okay, now that I've scared you, don't be scared. Because really, you understand that not only does the doctrine prepare you for the response that's coming your way, but you're going to know exactly how that response is coming. This is not a surprise. This is not like, I hit them with a snowball, now I'm just waiting to see what's coming my way. You're going to be told what's coming your way. And you're going to be equipped to go through what's coming your way. And yes, it's going to start off very mild, but the further you go as a son, the greater damage you will do to Satan's cause in this world, and the greater his response to that will be. And one day, folks, you won't just be hindering his policy of evil, as is his work in this world, but you'll be impacting angels in a realm you can't even see with your physical eyes. And he realizes that this point in the education is a critical point. Is it any wonder that so many churches that have gone through sonship at this point? See, I just didn't realize a whole lot of this. I just knew there seemed to be a place where they run off the rails. Now you get a better understanding of why. So I'm saying all of this to you while it's very exciting to think about, and that we're going to engage in an aspect of our Father's business to where we're actually going to participate in his operations against the adversary and his policy of evil. What a privilege that is. Now you understand the next part of what made me say, what have I been thinking, plodding along here like a plow horse down the furrow. This is at my doorstep now. How badly do I want this education really working in me? Is that not making any sense? And I'm looking at this and I'm going, oh, brother. I mean, it's like you've been sitting on the sideline watching it. And now the coach steps over and says, put on your helmet, you're in. Actually, football would not be the appropriate metaphor. It would be more like the ring. Climb through the ropes. Take off your helmet. And now you're going to engage the adversary. And you know what? Here's the wonderful thing about it is, what is worked in you by the power of his grace, what has been worked through this word in your inner man, is going to enable you to not only make a definite impact on Satan and what he is doing, but to be able to, without God intervening by his supernatural power, endure anything and everything that the adversary can do back to you. That at the end of that, when you crawl out of the ropes, you are more than a conqueror. Now that sounds great, and it is great, but don't lose what it's going to take to get there. And I'm not saying we might not be smart enough, or we might not. It's not any of that. It's our part is to believe that doctrine and implement that into our conduct and behavior. And that is the only thing that, if we're going to actually encounter the adversary, that's the only thing standing between us and having our lights punched out. But what a difference that... Do you know what? Do you realize that's the power of God that Paul was talking about? That in his weakness was his strength made manifest? When I am weak, he is strong. He talked about all of those things. That was the excellency of his power. So God doesn't have to step in front of us and say to the devil, not that James is the devil, but I was just looking at him, okay, but I'm just saying, well, God works in never mind. So it's not like he would step in front of you and say, hold it now, you don't get to do anything to them. He's not doing that at all. But if it was just us, that would be a terrible place to be in. But it's not just us. It is what has been worked in us as the doctrine has not only conformed us to the image of His Son, but it has given us the power of His grace to be able to not just, yeah, I can go in there and he's going to knock my block off and, but I'm going to be grinning. Look, you know what? You realize there is something real that is benefited by you. There's something happening in the midst of that in your inner man that you're going to take with you into the heavenly places and function out of forever. There is a glory in association with that. And we haven't even touched the hem of the garment about those issues yet. Those things are still sitting out ahead of us. But as we get ready to go into this part, where am I? Okay. As we get ready to go into this next part, you understand that verse 12, I've got it up here, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, brings us to a realization about the timing. And when I come next week, I'm passing out a timeline to everybody, and I'm going to have you add things on the timeline that will inform us as to the darkness and the works of darkness. There are things that you're going to be able to put on this timeline that we're actually going to diagram verse 12 onto the timeline. And there's a series of things that you're going to be placing on this timeline so that when you see that phrase, it makes sense to you. You're not just hearing something out of the blue anymore. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. But now you understand he's referring to something about what Satan was doing in this world, not just with the world, but also with Israel, that brought things to a pinnacle, the world of the ungodly. And them being worthy of wrath. Remember, we talked about those vessels of wrath fitted to destruction. Now, what if God, willing to make His wrath, to show His wrath and to make His power known, endured with much long suffering those vessels of wrath? And indeed He did. But you understand that the world, the ungodliness of the world and the ungodliness of Israel had both come to a peak at the exact same time. And instead of ushering in that day of wrath, what your father did is he brought in what he knew he would do from the foundation of the world. He would bring in this dispensation of grace. And now, with much long suffering, he's enduring those things because at the end, when this was interrupted, where the world was and where Israel was, that's exactly how God's going to deal with them when this dispensation of grace comes to an end. Nothing will have abated. As a matter of fact, the truth of the matter is how God's wrath, His wrath back here, has not diminished at all. The word long-suffering doesn't mean He's not angry anymore. The word long-suffering means I am putting off responding to the things that have provoked my wrath. And when those things are, by the time it's 2,000 years, how much longer does it go? It doesn't matter if it doesn't go another day. My point is, wherever it was right here, with all this long suffering in the world, it will be worse at the end of this dispensation of grace than it was at the beginning of this dispensation of grace. And now you're getting a little bit of the picture of what it means for the night to be far spent and the day to be at hand. Because it's not talking about the dispensation of grace itself. It's really pointing you to the timing of when God decided to bring that in. And I'll give you one more little clue about this. And part of knowing is knowing what happened in the past. We'll go back and see that. And when Peter speaks to the believing remnant, out when the resumption of the program takes place, he's going to have to teach them the same exact thing about making wise use of their time, and not just that, but in conjunction with that, understanding where they are and what is happening. Now, they're not in the dispensation of grace, so he's not using that phrase, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. But what he does say to them is he takes them back through a series of things in 2 Peter chapter 2 that lets them know that there were times when the evil and the ungodliness of this world reached a zenith. And when it did, God stepped in and did something supernaturally in response to it. Does anybody want to think off the top of their head what one of those times was when God responded to the ungodliness of the world? The flood? Exactly. And by the way, that was before there was ever in Israel. And you know what? 2 Peter chapter 2 gives you a series of illustrations. And guess what the first one in the list is? That God destroyed with a flood the world of the ungodly. Guess what the next one is? The Tower of Babel. Guess what the next one is? Sodom and Gomorrah. Guess what the next one is? I mean, he just goes through the list and he says, when evil gets to this, when the policy of evil has produced darkness, and the works of darkness are so pervasive in the world that God is finally going to do something. Here's the remnant out in the day of wrath, and Peter is saying there is a great and terrible day of the Lord that is coming. Yeah, you're in the middle of the day of wrath, but when he shows up at his advent, there is going to be an intervention by the power of God that has been something unseen in this world before. And he's educating them about the power of darkness and what Satan is trying to produce. And those things motivate them to cast off the works of darkness. And that phrase of the night is far spent, the day is at hand, is what then, when we realize what's encompassed in that, we, as an automatic response, as a son, cast off. I mean, I'm not saying you'll do it automatically. I'm saying that's what it leads you to do. To cast off the works of darkness and put on that armor of light. And now you realize what you're preparing for. Because you're preparing to labor with your Father in His operations that are in direct opposition to the adversary and his policy of evil in this world. Now, if you have any interest at all in slowing down the works of darkness in this world and impacting Satan's course, which he charted for this world, then this is the place you've been waiting for. Because now we're going to get introduced to this. And this is a very exciting piece of doctrine. And we're a long ways from finishing it. But this is what we're set up for. So when I come back next time, this is great. When I come back next time, I'm going to have this timeline, and we're actually going to chart out verse 12 and begin to look at all the things that were written in your Bible that were supposed to have clued you in, that when you read Romans 13:12, it would be like hearing bottom of the ninth with two out. All you need to hear is that phrase, and then you realize something. And by the way, you're going to realize something you never realized before. You've never been here before. This is a whole new level to your education. Are you beginning to get a little bit of the picture of why it's going to take more time and effort to get this done than what you've encountered before? I'm really hoping that what I've done in just giving you this general overview is to pull back the curtain just a little bit and make you realize that this is something that now is going to require more out of me than anything I've gotten up to this point. And if you're like me, I don't want to go through this without making sure I've got it. Be ashamed to walk out in the arena like the emperor who had no clothes. Oh, aren't these lovely?
Also, if you've never sparred.
If you've never sparred. Yeah, exactly. Huh?
Is it really possible, you made a statement, you said, where we slow down the policy of evil in this world? Are you talking about our actions, our godly thinking, living, labor is actually slowing down?
We're going to make an impact on the policy of evil in this world. Now, you heard what Sue is asking, but you have to understand, these groups, these sonship groups are few in number. The groups are few in number, and the groups themselves are small. Can you expect that we're going to exterminate the policy of evil? No. 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 Are we going to make a significant enough impact to solicit a response? Absolutely. But but you understand that by the doing of that, there is something in your sonship that you are learning that is educating you for things you're going to need when you get to the creature. Well, I wasn't going to say it this way. You're going to be taught here the very first things about how angels think. And when you see Paul write in Corinthians, "Know ye not we shall judge angels," you're going to need to know that. This is opening up a whole vista of things we have never looked at before.
Well, that ties into what I was going to say, that regardless of the impact we have on Satan's policy of evil, what we are accomplishing is demonstrating God's manifold wisdom.
Exactly.
To the principalities and powers.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we are laboring with the Father to accomplish that.
We are absolutely laboring, and that laboring is not for nothing. Yeah, and by the way, that's his cause. That's what he's trying to get accomplished here.
And also, we want to remember the interconnectedness of these four decision-making skills and how they're progressive. Okay, what you're talking about tonight, we couldn't have learned that in Romans chapter 8.
No.
So we learn the things we need to learn at the stage we need to learn them. Plus, these things that we're individually learning and accomplishing, the body does the same thing too.
Right.
So it has that double application, that interconnectedness with it.
I know people are not hearing you, so I'm just going to repeat that. Those things that we're learning those in the order that we need to learn them, because everything we're encountering later on is dependent upon that. And that's exactly right. Now, I know that you probably have lots of questions, but we haven't done any of the detail on this. But we'll start that when we come back next time. So 1 minute till, I'm going to let you out early. Don't say I never let you out early. And let me beg you, read the notes. Read the notes. If you were trying to follow me with the notes tonight, you know that didn't work. So read the notes. It's all in there and a lot of detail. I'm begging you. Yeah, it all works for good. Exactly right. That's right. All right, let's have prayer and we'll be done. Father, thank you for all of these folks that come over and over again so faithfully. Thank you that there's a group of people that care about getting this education, that understand that we're being taught things from your word that the adversary absolutely does not want people to know. And the general policy of evil is to keep the mystery a mystery, that no one would know anything about it. I'm grateful, Lord, that we do know about it and that we're learning the things that we are. And, Lord, we're encouraged because we believe that there's nothing that will happen in this world and nothing the adversary will orchestrate that you haven't taken into account and will prepare us for in your word. We're so grateful, Lord, for your wisdom in how you have constructed all of this. And thank you again for these folks, Lord. What a privilege it is to stand here and look at your word together. In Jesus' name, amen.